Morgoth or Melkor. Morgoth, originally Melkor, was one of the Ainur, the primeval spirits created by Eru Ilúvatar to shape the world. From the beginning he sought not harmony, but domination, trying to bend the very music of creation and reality itself to his will. Unlike Sauron, who aimed to rule, Morgoth's aim was to unmake and corrupt the world at its roots, making him the foundational source of evil in Arda. His method was corruption rather than creation. He tortured captured elves to make the first orcs, twisted lesser divine spirits, the Mire, into Balrogs, unleashed dragons, and bred other monsters to break armies and civilizations. He stole the Silmarils, 3 jewels containing the original holy light, and his assault on the 2 trees of Valinor plunged the world's chief light into darkness, triggering wars that consumed the First Age. Sauron first appears here only as Morgoth's lieutenant, the executor of a greater will. So the hierarchy of evil runs from Morgoth as the root to Sauron as branch. Whenever Sauron schemes to control, he is replicating Morgoth's original strategy of domination through corruption, not invention. Sauron. Sauron was originally a Maya, a lesser divine spirit, aligned with the Vala Aule the smith. Skilled in craftsmanship, order, and structure, he was drawn to Morgoth because he admired power and control above freedom. After Morgoth's defeat at the end of the First Age, Sauron survived and assumed the role of Dark Lord himself. In the Second Age, Sauron deceived the elves of Eregion by presenting himself as Annatar, Lord of Gifts. With his guidance, the elven smiths forged the Rings of Power. In secret, he crafted the One Ring in Mordor, a master ring designed to dominate all the others. When he placed it on his finger, the elves immediately perceived his treachery, and open war began. Sauron's ability to corrupt and ensnare lay at the heart of his power. He could not create life, but he could enslave wills. Defeated by the Númenóreans, and later by the last alliance of elves and men, Sauron's body was destroyed, but his spirit endured as long as the One Ring survived. Throughout the Third Age, he rebuilt his strength in Dol Guldur and later in Mordor, commanding vast armies of orcs, trolls, Easterlings, and Southrons. His will dominated the Nazgûl, kings of men enslaved by the 9 rings. Unlike Morgoth, whose evil sought destruction, Sauron sought domination. His ultimate goal was not to annihilate Middle-earth, but to order it under his tyranny, erasing freedom in favor of absolute control. Ungoliant, the Devourer of Light. Ungoliant was a primordial spirit of unknown origin, taking the form of a monstrous spider. Unlike Morgoth and Sauron, who sought dominion, Ungoliant's driving force was consumption. She devoured not to rule, but to obliterate, reducing creation into void. During the First Age, Morgoth allied with Ungoliant to execute one of his most destructive plots. Together, they assaulted Valinor and destroyed the 2 trees, which were the primary sources of light in the world. Ungoliant drank the light and sap of the trees until nothing remained, leaving the world in darkness. She then consumed the wells of Varda, erasing their radiant waters. Afterward, Ungoliant turned on Morgoth himself, demanding the Silmarils he had stolen. Morgoth, unable to satisfy her hunger, nearly perished at her hands until he was rescued by the Balrogs. Ungoliant fled south into the world and spawned offspring, the most infamous being Shelob, who later inhabited Cirith Ungol in the Third Age. Her ultimate fate is unknown, but it is said she consumed herself in her insatiable hunger. The Balrogs, spirits of fire, turned to shadow. The Balrogs were originally Mire, divine spirits of fire who served the Valar in the shaping of the world. Morgoth corrupted them in the earliest days, binding them to his will. Where once they embodied flame and light, they became demons of shadow and terror, cloaked in fire, and wielding whips and weapons of flame. They served as Morgoth's shock troops in the First Age, leading orc armies and breaking strongholds. At their peak, there may have been hundreds, though by the end of the wars against Morgoth, only a handful remained. Their presence on the battlefield symbolized near certain defeat. The most famous of the Balrogs was the one later known as Durin's Bane. After Morgoth's defeat, this Balrog hid beneath the Misty Mountains. In the Third Age it awoke, destroyed Khazad-dûm. It battled Gandalf the Grey in Moria, and after a duel that spanned the depths and heights of the mountain, Gandalf cast it down, though he perished in the struggle and was later returned as Gandalf the White. The Balrogs represented Morgoth's corruption of divine fire into instruments of fear and destruction. Each surviving Balrog was a relic of the world's earliest evil, carrying forward Morgoth's power long after his fall. Dragons, engines of ruin. Dragons were creations of Morgoth in the First Age, bred to combine raw physical power with cunning intelligence. The first of their kind was Glaurung, the father of dragons. He appeared without wings, but wielded devastating strength and a gaze that could instill despair or domination. Glaurung was responsible for the ruin of Nargothrond and the tragic doom of Turin Turambar, manipulating him through lies and psychological torment. Later, Morgoth bred winged, fire-breathing dragons, the greatest of which was Ankalagan the Black. Ankalagan was released in the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age, leading an army of flying dragons against the host of Valinor. His sheer size and firepower threatened to overturn the final victory of the West. He was slain only when Arundel, bearing a Silmaril, fought him in the sky and cast him down upon Thangorodrim, shattering Morgoth's volcanic fortress. In the later ages, remnants of dragonkind lingered. The most famous was Smaug, who claimed Erebor during the Third Age. Though far smaller than Ankalagan, Smaug demonstrated the greed, pride, and destructive capacity of dragons, nearly extinguishing the line of Durin and scattering the dwarves of Erebor, the werewolves and vampires of Middle-earth. Among Morgoth's corrupted creatures were monstrous wolves and bat-like beings often called werewolves and vampires in Tolkien's texts. These were not the same as later folklore creatures, but unique distortions bred for terror and war. Werewolves were giant wolves, inhabited or dominated by evil spirits. The most infamous was Carcharoth, the Red Maw, bred by Morgoth from the greatest of wolves and filled with a spirit of malice. Carcharoth was set to guard the gates of Angband and became the slayer of Huan, the Hound of Valinor, though he himself was killed after swallowing a Silmaril carried by Beren. Other werewolves, such as Draugluin, served Sauron directly during his rule of Tol in Garhoth. Vampires in Tolkien's world were less defined, appearing briefly in descriptions of creatures allied with Morgoth. The most notable was Thuringwethil, a messenger of Sauron in bat form, who carried his commands during the First Age. Both werewolves and vampires reveal the breadth of Morgoth's corruptive experiments. Shelob, the last child of Ungoliant. Shelob was a direct descendant of Ungoliant, dwelling in the high passes of the Efeldueth near Mordor during the Third Age. Unlike her mother, who sought to consume all light, Shelob was more animalistic, driven by hunger, cruelty, and a territorial will to dominate her lair. She inhabited Cirith Ungol, a key passage into Mordor, where she spun immense webs and preyed upon all who crossed her path, friend or foe. Even Sauron did not command her, but he tolerated her presence, using her as a living guard at the borders of his realm. Orcs feared her deeply, often sacrificing captives to her to avoid her wrath. Her venom strong enough to paralyze instantly. In the War of the Ring, she nearly succeeded in capturing Frodo Baggins, striking him with her stinger and leaving him unconscious. This act almost delivered the One Ring into Sauron's hands. Shelob was not aligned with Sauron's purpose. She represented the lingering evil of Ungoliant's brood, an independent and primal darkness, feeding in the shadows while the great powers of Middle-earth contested dominion. The Nazgul, the 9 servants of the ring. The Nazgul, or Ringwraiths, were once 9 kings of men who received rings of power from Sauron during the Second Age. Through these rings, their lifespans were unnaturally extended, but their wills were consumed. Over time, their bodies faded from the physical world, leaving only wraiths enslaved to Sauron's will. As long as the One Ring endured, their leader was the Witch King of Angmar, the most powerful of the 9. In the Third Age, he founded the realm of Angmar in the north, waging centuries of war to destroy the kingdom of Arnor. His downfall came in the Battle of Fornost, but he escaped to Mordor and later led Sauron's forces in the War of the Ring. He fulfilled the prophecy given by Glorfindel that no man would kill him when he was slain on the Pelennor fields by Éowyn, aided by Merry's barrow blade. The other Nazgul, including Khamul the Easterling, served as Sauron's captains, spreading terror wherever they appeared. They were particularly feared for their presence on the battlefield, which filled enemies with despair and paralysis, a power often called the Black Breath. They pursued Frodo relentlessly, sensing the One Ring whenever it was used. The Nazgul symbolized the fate of men most vulnerable to Sauron's promises, great kings who sought power, only to become shadows bound eternally to his dominion. Orcs and Trolls, armies of the Dark Lords. Orcs were Morgoth's most widespread creation. They originated through the capture and corruption of elves in the First Age, twisted into forms of mockery. Unlike their fair ancestors, orcs were bent, fanged, and cruel. They multiplied rapidly and became the backbone of every dark army. Orcs varied in size and strength, with some smaller mountain-dwelling types and others, like the Uruk-hai. Their weaknesses included disunity, cowardice, and a vulnerability to sunlight. Trolls were another of Morgoth's corruptions, modeled as a dark imitation of the Ents. They were massive, stone-skinned beings of tremendous strength but limited intelligence. Early trolls could not withstand sunlight and turned to stone when exposed, a flaw that persisted into later ages. In the Third Age, Sauron bred Olog-hai, a more advanced strain of trolls that resisted sunlight and fought with greater discipline, making them dangerous siege weapons and shock troops in open battle. Together, orcs and trolls formed the vast, expendable hosts of Morgoth and Sauron. They represented the Dark Lord's reliance on corruption, quantity, and brute strength, rather than creation or true innovation. Evil men, servants of shadow by choice. Not all of Sauron's servants were twisted by corruption. Many were men who chose his side willingly. The Easterlings, coming from the far eastern lands of Middle-earth, repeatedly joined Morgoth and later Sauron. They fought in massive hosts, known for their discipline and strength in open battle. The Haradrim from the south brought war elephants called Mumakil and launched devastating charges in Sauron's service. The Corsairs of Umbar, seafarers descended from Númenorian rebels, harassed Gondor's coasts for centuries and allied themselves with Mordor during the War of the Ring. Unlike orcs or trolls, their evil came not from corruption of being, but from choice, ambition, or coercion. Saruman, the Fallen Wizard. Saruman was originally the head of the Astari, the order of wizards sent by the Valar to aid Middle-earth against Sauron. He was the wisest of them, skilled in craftsmanship and knowledge of the enemy's devices. However, pride and desire for mastery led him down a path of corruption. Saruman became obsessed with the rings of power and the lore of Sauron. He studied the arts of domination, convinced he could rival or even replace the Dark Lord. From his tower of Orthanc in Isengard, he bred armies of Uruk-hai, stronger orcs capable of moving in daylight. He turned against his mission, abandoning the charge to protect Middle-earth. He sought the One Ring for himself, believing he could control it and establish his own dominion. His downfall came when his armies were defeated at Helm's Deep and Isengard was overthrown by the Ents. Stripped of power, he descended further into malice, eventually meeting a dishonorable end at the hands of his servant, Wormtongue. Saruman embodied the danger of pride and envy. Though not created for evil, he willingly abandoned wisdom for power, becoming one of the most destructive figures of the Third Age.